Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to do in this most likely very disorganized and unprepared video is talk about some of the elements of biblical exegesis from the Catholic perspective. You might ask, what is exegesis? Well, exegesis is Greek for to lead out, which means that basically take a look at the scripture text and try to devise what is actually meant by the text itself. So basically, it's an in-depth study of scripture in itself. To be very blunt about it, I'm no expert at biblical exegesis. I've only taken one class with another class of some exegetical influence, but this is just kind of a very basic, just like, oh, how do Catholics do exegesis? Or not even Catholics necessarily, but just Christians in general, beginner Christians. How can one person go about in their private study doing exegesis? So I got this book right here by Michael J. Gorman. It's recommended to me by a professor. It's actually one of our textbooks in Elements of Catholic Biblical Exegesis class. So I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about was versions of the Bible that are acceptable for exegesis, before I go into different elements of what exegesis is and what all that includes. A side note, this book is designed for a lot more than what I'm prepared to talk about. So there's so much information in here, and this is just one book of hundreds of different books on how to do exegesis, so bear with me on that. So one of the pages that I marked was an interesting thing. We'll talk about versions of the Bible that are good for exegesis. Preferred for exegesis that you'll see on the left: NRSV, NAB, TNIB, and NET. These are what Michael Gorman thinks are the versions of the Bible you want to use when you do biblical exegesis. Some of the other translations that are popular fall under the middle categories, like useful for exegesis with caution, unacceptable but helpful in other ways, and then plain unacceptable for exegesis. Notice there are two very popular translations under that category: the KJV, otherwise King James Version, otherwise sometimes known as the Authorized Version, and the New King James Version. I don't actually own either one of those texts, and I've not done much work with study of either text, but most of what I do is with either NAB and the RSV. Those are the translations that I primarily have access to, or the ones that I own. So, and then it goes through just different editions of Bibles that are commonly. Oh, goodness gracious! Let me focus here. Maybe we'll just skip that part for now. There we go. And so, it seems like the NAB is one of the more reliable translations, and I have two of them right here. These aren't the only two that I have. Both of these are the NAB RE, which is the revised edition of the NAB, so it's just kind of an updated, updated changes by the researchers. And I've looked at both the NAB and the NAB RE. They're really not that different. It's just the wording of some phrases has changed. These are my two main editions that I have, the medium-sized edition and the Oxford Catholic Study Bible, 3rd edition. This book talks about the 2nd edition, but this one is a little bit newer. So just some additions and revisions of the study notes, and of course they don't mess with the text, but the book, Gorman's book, recommends this version for Catholic exegesis if you're going to do study. I also have one that I use a lot, and especially when I used in missionary work, is the Anselm Academic Study Bible, which is also very good, very in line with Catholic doctrine, but also going with Dei Verbum and the Second Vatican Council's exhortation to really break open the scriptures and do an in-depth study. So this is primarily for exegesis in English. And side note here, exegesis is best done in the original languages. If you have the capability and the know-how to read and study the original languages, that would be the best way to do it. But some of us are not versed in those languages, so we go to what our native tongues are. And for me, my native tongue is English. I speak Spanish, Portuguese, and Gallego, and that's about it. But English is my primary language, so so it goes through different versions of the Bible and different study options as well. Its recommended translation is the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, which sorry about the dog bone there, which I don't really have much access to right now. I do have a complete version at my grandmother's house that I have yet to bring over here, but I do have the Gospels and Acts, the St. John's Bible, which is a calligraphied Bible, and this is the NRSV translation. But side note, sorry, I'm all over the place. But biblical exegesis, basically, we go into what is meant by the text, and also just kind of like what the original writers had in mind, or the original authors of the text, and at the same time, like what the text meant to the people who read it at the time, and what it means to us nowadays. So it goes through two methods of exegesis in the first chapter. Goes to the different types of criticisms, but the two main types of exegesis that most people are familiar with are the synchronic approach. Synchronic is Greekish for meaning within time. So this is kind of like more of a spiritual approach to exegesis, whereas the diachronic is what we more commonly known as historical critical method, which means meaning across time. Catholics in the last century have adopted the historical critical method as a way of understanding like the cultural elements of the times that the scriptures were written, also what was meant by the original authors to the audience that they were writing to at the time, and other historical variations and factors that played a role. Of course, it has to be vetted against tradition and the synchronic approach. So if you add all those two together, it's basically what you get is the mainline Catholic interpretation of the scriptures, and that's debated today, heavily debated in scholarly circles and among traditionalists and liberalists and whatnot. But if you want to go with the basic Catholic teaching on scriptures, I mean, you combine the two forms together, historical critical method and the synchronic approach, as well as some of the other approaches that are germane to the discussion, but those two are the primary ones, and put the two together, they vet each other, and you have scriptural exegesis guided by tradition that will lead you to what the Catholic Church teaches. So anyway, just a short little video. I just figured I would bring this book out and talk about it a little bit, and show it in light of a couple different versions of the Bible that, well, same versions, but different editions. So, alright, that's all I have for right now. Thank you very much, and God bless.